The Legend of Zelda series is like a lot of other video game franchises. It repeats itself, there's a pattern. And because of this, there's going to be a lot of rules that apply to every single Legend of Zelda game as you're adapting each one into a movie. That's what today's video is all about. It's a basic list of rules on how to adapt the Legend of Zelda series. All the things we can't do, and all the things we have to do. Hi everybody, it's Kevra. That's me, I'm Kevra. Hi. Quick reminder, this is my third video in the How to Adapt the Legend of Zelda series. Now, some of the rules that we're going to go over in this video are actually based on decisions that were made in the first two videos. So if you haven't checked them out yet, make sure you do that first. The first one will be linked up in the corner. They'll both be linked down below. If you've already checked them out, then let's get started on this video. So first things first, we got to get this out of the way. These stories can't be a one-to-one adaptation. And that's one of the trickier parts when it comes to doing an adaptation, because you have to give it a fresh coat of paint because it's in a different medium. But if you change it too much, people are going to wonder why they even bothered adapting this story when they could have just told a brand new story. So we have to figure out what needs to stay the same and what needs to change. I feel like that's such an obvious thing to say, that we need change, but at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of purists out there screaming, you don't need to change anything. You just take the exact story from the game and make that because it's perfect the way it is. Make exactly that or you're ruining my childhood. We're just gonna go ahead and move on. So the first half of this video is going to be about what you can't do when adapting these games. These are the rules that establish why something from the game can't carry over to the new adaptation we're making. The first one we're going to go over, time. Now there's lots of reasons why the story can't be exactly the same in a movie. For one, it would be too long. Like if you just took all the cutscenes from a Zelda game, it's about as long as a movie itself, and those cutscenes don't even show Link traversing lands, fighting bosses, and if you're foaming at the mouth screaming at the screen right now, and that's why it should have been a TV show! I get it. I used to say the exact same thing. Link goes to so many different locations to get so many important items, and it just seemed to make sense to be in a television format. One episode, he'd be in Kokiri Forest. Another episode, he'd be at Death Mountain. Another episode, he'd be at Zora's Domain. It just made perfect sense. Until I realized that while that's great for a video game story, that is not good for a television story. And there's a big reason why. You cannot have a ton of temples and McGuffins. If you don't know what a McGuffin is, think of it as the items that are really important to the story's plot. It doesn't always have to be an item, but for this comparison, we'll just stick with items. So in Zelda games, that would be spiritual stones, sage medallions, fused shadows, mirror shards. It's the items Link needs to get a bunch of to make a real change happen in the story. As I said earlier, great game mechanic. But when it's not in a video game, it is a horrible storytelling mechanic because it's essentially just and then storytelling as opposed to but or therefore storytelling. Okay, I feel like I'm losing a couple of you right now. You know what and then means, you know what but and therefore mean, but you're not sure what it means when it comes to storytelling. So, just let's go over a couple of examples. Link awakens Saria and gets a sage medallion. And then, Link awakens Darunia and gets a sage medallion. And then, Link awakens Ruda and gets a sage medallion. And then Impa, and then Nabooru. Again, this is great for a video game story, but it's too repetitive for a movie or television show. You're basically just watching the same sequence of events over and over where Link goes to a town, solves a problem so he can get into the temple to get the magical item he needs, then moves on to the next town to do the exact same thing again, and then again, and then again, and then again, and then again. And then the biggest problem with this is, it doesn't affect the plot. You could literally get these in any order because none of them have a real effect on the story. And a story has to have change or consequences to be entertaining. And a lot of these games do have that. Link awakens the sages, therefore he can get to Ganondorf's castle. Link pulls out the Master Sword to defeat Ganondorf, but He's not old enough to defeat Ganondorf and gets trapped in the Sacred Realm, which completely shifts our story and gives the main character a new goal on how to defeat Ganondorf. Those are the story elements you take when you're making the adaptation, and you either cut out, rewrite, or condense the other stuff. For a movie, condensing works well. If you go the television route, you might as well write an entirely new show because we don't want to see Link spending the second half of Ocarina of Time where in 6 different episodes he's just collecting sage medallions. You would want those episodes to have a real impact on the story. There needs to be a real and different purpose if Link visits 5 different locations. And the story that happens there needs to in some way move the plot forward. If you don't, it'll be boring. And if you don't believe me, go watch It Chapter 2. They spend like 40 minutes having us watch 5 different characters, taking about 8 minutes each to do the exact same thing. And it's really poor storytelling. Now, there is always an exception to the rule, so I'm gonna go ahead and point out 2 different movies that have 6 different McGuffins. And both of these movies handle it quite well. Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. However, even these movies have therefore but storytelling. Thanos gets the space gem, but Bruce Banner gets away to warn the Avengers. Therefore, the rest of the gems are harder for Thanos to collect. Thanos goes to Vormir to get the soul gem, but he has to sacrifice his daughter that he deeply loves. Therefore, Peter Quill will cost the Avengers to lose because he won't be able to control himself when he finds out this information. Now, when it comes to Zelda, yes, the individual towns have obstacles that cause therefore but storytelling, but those obstacles never affect the actual plot. They just delay us from getting into the dungeon. That's extremely different. Also, although there were 6 MacGuffins in the Avengers movies, the movies did a good job of condensing them by grouping them together. In Infinity War, Thanos starts off with one of the gems before the movie even starts, gets the second one within a few minutes, and the rest of the 2.5 hours is spent gathering the final 4. In Endgame, the writers had the Avengers go back in time to New York because there were 3 stones there at the same time. Although they did fail at getting one and had to go back in time to get it. But that's just another example of but therefore storytelling that had more impact on the story overall because Steve Rogers seeing Peggy Carter when they travel back in time is a big motivation on why he decides to go back in time to spend the rest of his life with her. I hope you guys have seen those movies, otherwise I kind of just spoiled the hell out of it. Also, because I hope you understood the reference. I did. I understood that reference. Well, at least one of you did. You know, probably a lot more of you. It made $2 billion at the box office. Like, 3rd highest grossing movie of all time. Come on. Speaking of Link collecting things, it would also be really boring to watch Link collect 20 different tools to solve puzzles with. It would take up too much time, and the ones he does collect needs to have a purpose. Link shouldn't just get the item in the movie because it was in the game, especially since most of those items are game mechanics and they have nothing to do with the story. However, that doesn't mean you can't add them. In one of the script outlines that I read you guys, Link gets a hook shot, but he picks it up specifically because he needs it for the next place he's going and he knows it. However, you can't overload him because the audience will wonder where he's carrying all this stuff. He'll always have a sword and shield, but anything else is extra and needs to serve a purpose. He also can't keep getting these items randomly from a chest. You could maybe do that once just as a fun wink to the fans, but that's it. Because again, we don't want to repeat the same thing over and over again. He also can't get impractical items like the spinner from Twilight Princess. It's fun, but where the hell is he gonna put that thing? That's the type of item that would be at a location that Link would use while he's there, but then he has to leave it behind because that shit ain't fitting in his bag. And we're not using some stupid cop-out rule where he can just magically shrink his items to justify him having an entire arsenal. I mean, that's just bad writing. Come on. Kind of like this cutaway, but hey, I never claimed to be a writer. Oh wait, yeah, I did. Okay, so far I think I've been talking about stuff that I think is pretty obvious, so let's move into things that are less obvious. For example, romance. This is a topic that's pretty divisive, because while there's a lot of people who don't like the idea of Link and Zelda being in a romantic relationship, there's also a lot of fans who really love this idea. I've seen so many people say they've teased us about it in games, and I've seen so much fan art where they're kissing or in love, but it seems like a really bad idea for them to be in a romantic relationship, and there's 2 big reasons why. The first one has to do with the bloodlines and the pseudo-reincarnation. If you played Skyward Sword, you know that the Zelda in that game was the reincarnation of Goddess Hylia, and that every Zelda we see in the games is a descendant of that first Zelda, and that the firstborn in the royal family is always named Princess Zelda. However, Zelda is usually depicted as an only child in the games, which means she has to have a child to continue the royal bloodline. If she has that child with Link, that means all future Zeldas will also be related to the incarnation of Link. So when he's reincarnated a few hundred years later, if he gets in a romantic relationship with the Zelda of that time period, it's kind of incest because it's basically his great-great-great-great-granddaughter. Even though it's not technically like a blood incest thing, it's more like a spiritual incest thing. Now, the argument against what I just said is that Link isn't actually reincarnated. The hero's spirit isn't a soul, and I actually think that's a fair argument that makes sense, because if that wasn't true, how could the hero of time teach fighting lessons to the hero of Twilight? Still, if it's not a soul, it's something reminiscent of that, and it's a part of every version of Link, just like the bloodline in Hylia is a part of every version of Zelda. She's not reincarnated, because that would mean that she would have to literally give birth to herself. But still, even if she's not reincarnated, every Zelda is connected through blood and the power of Hylia. So while the result isn't exactly incestuous, it's still kind of like a sci-fi pseudo-incestuous situation, which is why I think there's also a lot of fans out there that don't like the idea of them being together. And when you compare the two situations, I think it's better to appeal to the fans that would be creeped out if it happened, as opposed to the fans who would just be disappointed if it didn't. The other reason a romantic relationship would be weird is because that means Link would be the next king of Hyrule. I mean, sure, you could argue he earned it after saving the entire world, but it just kind of seems like a waste. I mean, we've seen Link go to several different lands, and I think that's what he should be doing once he saves Hyrule. He's an adventurer. He saves people. He doesn't sit in a throne, make royal decrees, and govern over people. He wakes windfish and stops moons from falling. It's definitely the weaker of the two arguments, but let's face it, nothing was going to beat incest. I see your incest argument, and I raise you a I don't like the fact that Link is king argument. Your move, sir. Get out. The next big thing we can't do is the Zelda timeline. And what that specifically means is we can't have 3 different timelines. You know, it's hard enough for the casual Zelda fans to keep up with or even understand the 3 different timelines, and some hardcore fans even debate the logic of the official timeline due to some of its discrepancies. Plus, we don't want to confuse the fans that are new to the series by going back and forth between different timelines. However, that doesn't mean that we just choose one timeline and ignore the rest of the games. Instead, you have to reconfigure the timeline and figure out how it works best for telling a set of stories. For example, the 5 games I picked to adapt are all from different timelines. I found a way to not only make it work, but actually work better from a narrative perspective so they tie in more closely to one another, with each of them still feeling like a standalone story. So the last thing we need to talk about on the list of things you can't do is also on the list of things you need to do. The music is part of the soul of the Zelda franchise, and it absolutely needs to be present in the movies. One of the best parts about the Zelda series is the music, and they even do concerts specifically for its iconic music. People adore this music, and you absolutely have to use it in your adaptations. However, it is unrealistic to expect that they're going to keep all of the music or leave it unchanged for these new adaptations. Even if you love a particular song, it may not fit with the scene and the mood that the scene is trying to convey. For example, I have a script outline where I introduce the characters Koome and Kotake, but their theme song doesn't match the tone of the scene that they're in. So, the composer would either need to alter it and do a different version of it so that it's slower and gives you more of a feeling of mystery or uneasiness, or they'd have to come up with a new song. And even songs that do fit the scene still likely need to be altered. However, I think most people would be okay with that. It's not like Zelda fans booed Nintendo for making the 25th anniversary music album because the tracks sounded different. Okay, so we've talked about the things that we can't do. Now let's talk about the things that we need to do. Basically, these are the rules where we have to either add something that wasn't there before or make sure we keep something the same. And this first one is extremely controversial, and I really think it shouldn't be. Link needs to speak. I've seen quite a few people say that if they ever make a movie or television adaptation, Link should never speak because he never speaks in the games, which is false. He does speak, we just usually never hear him speak. Although in most games, we only ever had him say either yes or no, and sometimes we'd accidentally have him say yes repeatedly because we just want that damn owl to stop talking. However, in Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, Link had a lot of different options of what he could say. And in Wind Waker, we actually hear him shout. Come on! In fact, if we go all the way back to Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, he speaks in that game. He finds a mirror and then proudly announces it to no one because he's in a room by himself. Weirdo. This is different. I have a microphone. Also, since it is very likely that Link is the main character in these adaptations, then if he doesn't speak, you would have to make that a part of his character and explain why he doesn't speak to the audience. So then you have to figure out, well, why doesn't this character speak? Did he get his tongue cut out because he backtalked his abusive father at one point? Did something so traumatic happen to him as a young child that he hasn't been able to speak since because he still can't recover from it? Does he have a really high-pitched voice that he's very self-conscious of? Maybe he's just a dick that thinks he's better than everyone else. Is he socially awkward and doesn't know how to talk to people, which is why he's such a good swordsman because it was literally a coping mechanism, and now this is a much sadder story about a guy who is skilled because he has no friends and can't talk to people. You know, to be perfectly honest, I'm not even sure why people don't want him to speak in the first place.
Don't you ever clean in here?
Excuse me, princess.
That's it. That's the reason right there. That's the exact reason.
Okay, so there's one good reason.
It's fear. Fear of not knowing how he's gonna sound. What if he's cocky about being a total badass? That's not the Link I know. What if they write him so he's always making jokes and trying to be the funny guy? That's not Link. What if they make him snarky? That's not Link, except in Breath of the Wild where he has some totally snarky dialogue options. But here's the thing. You can totally write Link as a good character, and I think that's why people wanted Tom Holland to play him a few years ago. His version of Peter Parker is so endearing, caring, soft-spoken, and yet heroic and courageous. He also had a youthfulness to him that no Zelda fan film has ever had. Okay, real quick, seriously, what's up with that? Why is it every time I watch a fan film with a live-action version of Link, the dude looks 30? Like, you don't have to cast an actual teenager, but cast somebody that at least still looks like they're a teenager. I don't understand why. What are you doing? What are you doing? Now, I'm not saying that I want Tom Holland to play him because honestly, I don't want anyone famous in that role. But I am saying that something in that vein shows that we can have a good version of Link, which is good because Link needs to be a real character and he needs to have real motivations. Yes, you can technically have a fully developed character that does not speak. You can do it, but it is extremely difficult to do that. Specifically because he is the main character. If he was a side character, it wouldn't be as problematic. But we know he is the main character. He is the one we play as. He is the one going and doing all the objectives to get to the end of the game to save the day. Even in Breath of the Wild, where it is a mostly Zelda-centric story, she is not the character that moves the plot forward. She is not the one saving Hyrule. And if Link shows up to all these different towns and can't say what he wants, what he needs, or how he can help, it's gonna make writing him so difficult. And because he's our main character, we need to actually develop him. One of the great things about Link in the video games is that we can put ourselves in his shoes. I mean, up until Breath of the Wild, we could even name the character after ourselves. They would basically give him no character so we could be that character. Yeah, not really a good choice for a movie. The movies have to create a character that makes us care. People don't like movies where the main character is bland and simply doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And that's pretty much Link's character in 90% of the games. Breath of the Wild is a perfect example of this. He shows very little emotion in that game. Most of the flashbacks just show him as a bodyguard, which means the only thing we really know about him is that he's a skilled fighter. We have no idea if he cares. It could be that he's just saving Hyrule because that's his knightly duty and it was ingrained into him by his father. Or it's simply self-preservation. He doesn't want to live in a world ruled by Calamity Ganon, and saving other people just happens to be a byproduct of that. He doesn't care who lives or dies, he just wants to save himself. Ocarina of Time is another good example. We get the feeling he's friends with Saria, but we don't know if he cares about anyone else. In that game, we don't know if he usually is antisocial and keeps to himself, or if they considered Link the life of the party. We don't know if Link always felt at home in Kokiri Forest, or if he felt like an outsider. We have no clue what his desires are. We don't know if he even wants to save Hyrule. He's pretty much just told to do it, and he just does it. That's why there's that meme of, I did it because a tree told me to do it. Like, it could be that Link is just an obedient tween who always does as father asks. He needs good character motivation because he needs to be a fully developed character. And he's not the only one that needs more development. For these adaptations, we need to develop the characters and their relationships. We need to give Link fully developed characters to interact with and care about, because not only will that give Link a reason to save Hyrule, but it also gives the audience a reason to care about it being saved. And some of these characters can just be charming, minor characters we only see for a few minutes, but to get us truly invested, we need characters that have very distinct personalities, and likely go through some changes so we can see their character arc. In the games, Zelda is typically the one that is developed the best. In Ocarina of Time, she has a character arc. She goes from being a small, young, naive child to a wise adult that realizes the mistakes of her past. In Breath of the Wild, we see her consistently struggling, trying to manifest her powers that she has no idea how to access. And because they need those powers to stop Calamity Ganon, she carries a tremendous weight on her shoulders. So even though you probably should develop her a little bit more, she's the one that actually needs the least work. Then there's characters like Saria and Ilia. They care about Link, and we assume Link cares about them, but they're static characters. They don't grow, they don't change, and they play such a small role, we don't even know the real relationship between them and Link. Although, that problem would partially be solved just by letting Link actually talk to them. Because when he doesn't talk, we just get weird moments like when Saria tells him, I hope you come back to the forest and visit. And then he just slowly backs away like, this is awkward. I barely know you. Don't follow me! And there's one other thing that you need to do with these characters. Kill them. Not all of them. I don't want to watch all of them die. I'm not a monster. I just want to watch some of them die. I might be a bit of a monster. But the reason some characters need to die is because Link shouldn't be able to save everybody. If he always is able to save everyone, it seems like there's no one at risk. Link cannot save everybody, because if he does, if he always saves everyone and gets that happy ending, that means the audience will always expect that. So if someone is in peril later, they're not going to take it that seriously. They're going to assume that that character will be alright because they're always alright, which totally deflates the purpose of putting a character in peril. Now, I know that there have been deaths in the Zelda universe before, but none that are really that impactful. When we meet the Great Deku Tree in Ocarina of Time, he's already on the verge of death. The audience doesn't develop a connection with him because we meet him and then he dies. It's like finding out a stranger died. I mean, while you were watching this video, somebody out there died, and do you care? No, of course you don't, because you don't know them. Impa from Skyward Sword is another perfect example of this. Yes, she's there throughout most of the game. Yes, you develop a relationship with her, but she dies just because she's ready to let go. It's kind of a nice moment where you're like, oh, good for her. She's done protecting Zelda after all these years, and now she can finally move on. That's kind of sweet. Then there's the people of Colent. Yes, I know it's an entire island of people that disappeared, but they weren't real. Get mad, I don't care, I said it. Honestly, the only big death is in the Fallen Hero timeline when Ganondorf kills Link. And we never even got to see that. Okay, that's another story I want to see adapted. Obviously not for general audiences. That's a small budget, anime, straight to streaming kind of a situation, but it'd be dope. The next big thing that we need to do only applies to certain Zelda games, but there's enough of them that I decided to go ahead and talk about it here. Because every story in Act 2 needs some kind of a change. Most of the 3D Zelda games follow the basic rules of storytelling that you need to make actions have consequences or have plans fall apart, or both. The one exception would be Breath of the Wild. The current story that we as the player go through doesn't have any changes. As soon as you finish the Great Plateau, Link's super objective is to go to the castle and defeat Calamity Ganon. Nothing changes that plan. Link doesn't fail and have to find a new plan. He can just go straight to the castle and defeat Calamity Ganon. Even if you go and take back the 4 Divine Beasts, it changes nothing from a story perspective. And a lot of the Zelda top-down games are also this way. Link's Awakening is a good example. The twist of that game is that the entire island is a dream, and that if he wakes the Windfish, all these characters are going to disappear. In a way, it does give us a consequence, but it doesn't change Link's plan. His goal is always the same. His path to the goal is always the same. And that information is a twist that's cool, but it doesn't affect anything. It's not like Link obtaining the Master Sword in Ocarina of Time, which allowed Ganondorf to open the Sacred Realm, get his hands on the Triforce of Power, and give Link a brand new goal to take down Ganondorf, because getting that magical weapon suddenly wasn't a good enough plan. So if a game's story doesn't have that, we'll have to add something like it. Now, one of the very first things that you're going to need to do if you're adapting this video game series is identify the style and tone that best fits with a Legend of Zelda movie. Now look, I'm not saying that each one of these games is the exact same. Wind Waker and Majora's Mask, 2 very different styles and tones. But what is at the core of the Legend of Zelda series? It's not Lord of the Rings just because it has that medieval fantasy vibe to it. But clearly it at least has a little bit of that. There's magic, but it's not Harry Potter. It has a little bit of Avatar because even though this isn't an alien planet, there is that sense of wonder as Link explores this mysterious new world. It's a blend of lighthearted and fun, but with a sense of serious threats and danger like an MCU movie or a Star Wars film. It should be made with children in mind, but it's far off from a kid's film because it can be enjoyed by everyone, and even the high school and college kids should be super excited about seeing it because of the thrilling adventure they get to go on with Link. And that's why picking a director is so important. What the hell, Cobra? In your other video, you said that doing casting and picking a director is a bunch of bullshit. What? Yeah, I know, just bear with me here for a second. When they're looking for a director, they have to pick someone who can find that balance. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good the director is, because if they don't get that, it's going to be a bad adaptation. That's why it drives me nuts when people say, this director or that director should do the movie, before they even know how that director might view and approach that adaptation. Heck, even if the director understands what the movie is, they might not be interested, or they might want to do a different version. Because maybe they understood what it was supposed to be, but they just really latched onto the idea of, well, there's ancient technology in Breath of the Wild with the Divine Beast and the motorcycle, and I really want to do something like that. So they lean very heavily into that, and kind of disregard a lot of the story and the characters, because this director thinks that the technology aspect is so much more interesting, so they're gonna put that front and center. That's why the who matters, but it's stupid to pick any actual person. It's more about what kind of director they would be, rather than picking some well-known director who people tend to love. You have to talk to these different directors to find out who has the right vision, and we're not just talking about the visual aspect. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why so many action movies fall flat on their face. The studio hires someone who can paint a pretty picture with action scenes to get those cool water cooler moments, but there's nothing behind them that makes them stick because everything else was constructed so poorly. You need someone who can really capture the magic and mystery of Fi floating and having Link follow her to the goddess statue, instead of someone who can just make a sword battle look cool. You need someone who can really develop characters and let them connect instead of just spitting out exposition between objectives and action scenes. Because this isn't an action movie. But on the other hand, you do need a director that can deliver on the action, because this is a movie with action. This isn't just some simple fantasy story about characters. But at the same time, if the high stakes are there, but the character development isn't, if you kill off a character or put someone in danger that I do not care about, then what's the point? That's why that balance is so important, because this is a fun, heartfelt fantasy movie with action, and you need to find someone who understands all the different tones and can relay them on film. And that exact same thing applies to actors. Obviously, you have to cast actors that fit the roles. They have to be the right age, have the right look, have a good comprehension of what the character is, and make them do screen tests with other actors to make sure that the chemistry is there. And it's one of the last things you need to do, because by the time you get everything else aligned, your young Link might not look so young anymore. You will likely have to see tons of different actors before you find the ones that all fit the criteria that you're looking for. So the idea of saying this actor would be perfect for the role is kinda silly, especially when you add in the fact that not all Links should be played the exact same. They should all be similar, but still unique. That's why I will not be casting or picking a director for any of these adaptations we're about to go over. While it's fun to imagine, and I've seen lots of other videos do it, at the end of the day, it's just bullshit fluff that does not matter. I mean, don't get me wrong, directors and actors are extremely important, but the best people for those jobs might be complete unknowns. And the people we think would make a great choice could be terrible because they want to make it their own thing instead of trying to be faithful to what's there. Or because this actor doesn't have chemistry with that actor. And that's why I hate it when videos talk about dumb shit like, dude, Peter Jackson is 100% the director that should do a Legend of Zelda movie. I mean, he's already proven he can do the medieval content with Lord of the Rings. Now he just needs to do this big, epic Legend of Zelda trilogy. Or, dude, Tom Holland needs to play Link because he plays Spider-Man and it's awesome. And I love Spider-Man, so I love Tom Holland. So just put Tom Holland, like, in a green tunic and have him play Link. Perfect. No, just stop. Look, those could be fantastic choices, but we just don't know. Up until you get them in a room and you figure out what their vision is for the characters or for the story, you don't know how they're going to adapt it. And you know what? Great directors can make bad movies. Fantastic actors can give bad performances. I mean, M. Night Shyamalan was supposed to be the big new hot director in the early 2000s after he made The Sixth Sense and Signs, which people loved, and now he's just been making crap. And one of those pieces of crap was an adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And he was even a fan of that show. And it still was a flaming hot dumpster fire. However, since we're talking about actors, you'll want to try and reuse them if you can. You know, when an audience likes a character, you want to use that to your advantage and try not to throw them away instantly. But at the same time, the actors who play Link and Zelda can't look 17 forever, and a big part of the Legend of Zelda mythology is the fact that these characters keep getting reincarnated. So maybe try and keep those same incarnations of those characters 2 or 3 times, and if you can't, maybe just try to allude back to those other versions. Also, I feel like we would want the same actor to play Ganondorf since he really only had one incarnation. So I would actually argue that they should cast Ganondorf pretty young, so you could use him several times and try not to recast. I think 20-something would be a good starting age for that character. That way, he can't age out of the role, and the only problem you face is the fact that he may not want to come back after a few movies. And that's it. We are done going over the basic rules. We've selected the story, we've selected the medium, and now that we've gone over all the rules, we can start discussing those 5 specific games I have carefully selected to do for this Legend of Zelda film series. Now, I played around with this list of 5 games a lot, and with the way I have mapped them out, they all flow from one to the next with a connection to the previous one and the following one. What are they? Well, right now I'll tell you about the first one, but I'm gonna wait to tell you about the rest as we go along. The first adaptation I debated on quite a bit, but in the end, it was very clear what should be first. The rest don't even come close, and that's why we're starting with The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. Nah, I'm just joking with you. I didn't think about it though, because I was like, that would be an interesting, unique way to introduce an audience to Hyrule, because you don't start off there, and Link slowly has to discover it the same time that the audience is discovering it. And then they're like, oh, I want to know what happened like long ago, so you're really setting up for like the prequel movie. But then once you do the prequel movie, are you doing a sequel to the prequel, or are you doing a sequel to like the Wind Waker? It just gets too confusing for audiences. You don't want like a weird timeline. That's why You create a singular timeline where all the games occur, and no matter how you change things around on the timeline, there's still one title that will always come first. The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword. That's what my next 2 videos will focus on. One video will discuss how exactly you adapt the game, and the other video is a kind of loose example of what the movie could possibly look like. Think about it like a math equation. One video will focus on the entire math equation, where I will go over what the constants of the equation are, in other words, the things that have to be there to make it work, and I'll also give you a lot of variables that could be a variety of different things. Then the other video that I'm doing is essentially what's called a treatment, which is basically a very detailed outline or synopsis. And you take that and you basically use that to pitch it to a studio, or in this case also Nintendo, to tell them like, this is what I want the script to eventually become. Of course, I'm not pitching it to a studio or to Nintendo, I'm pitching it to you, random stranger on the internet. Don't you feel special? Hi, internet friend. In some areas, I go into great detail, especially character moments. Other areas I kind of just gloss over, especially when it comes to the action. It's not as simplistic as when you're reading a play and it just says, they fight, but sometimes it's kind of that. I also gloss over scenes that seem like it would be almost verbatim what it would be like in the game, because odds are you've already played that game and don't really need it repeated back to you. So, that's basically how the rest of this series is going to go. But those are future videos for another time, and if you want to make sure you don't miss them, hit the subscribe button. If you liked the video, give it a like, and if you didn't like the video and you're sitting there thinking, this guy has ruined the Legend of Zelda series for me, and I will never be able to play another game after this. It's all your fault, and I will have my revenge. Yeah, be sure to let me know that in the comments below. And until next time, I'll catch you later.